Good morning. So today we're going to take notes on page 63 and 64 in our interactive notebook. The notes are covering the topic of rational numbers. If you notice the pages up on the screen, you'll see where you're supposed to put your copies in. All right, let's go to page 64. Once again, our topic for today is rational numbers. Your essential question is, how do I convert rational numbers in order to list them on a number line? Our standard for today is 6NS6, and by the end of this lesson, you should be able to do the following. I can position rational numbers on a number line. Remember that a rational number is any number that can be written as a decimal or a fraction. So really, we're not looking at 0, but we are looking at 1, 2, 3, 1.5, 2/3. Anything that you can write either as a decimal or a fraction counts. So in order to do the next several types of problems, we are going to have to convert numbers between 3 different forms. You'll have to be able to take a decimal and turn it into a percent, or a percent and turn it into a decimal, or a decimal and turn it into a fraction, or a fraction and turn it into a percent, and go back and forth between any of those 3. So hopefully by today's lesson, you will be able to take any of those type of numbers and convert it back and forth. And the reason we do this is when we put things onto a number line in order to order them from least to greatest or greatest to least, or determine whether something has a greater value than something else, you really need to put the numbers all in the same form in order to do that. If I'm trying to compare 1/2, 32%, and 65/100ths, it's hard. But if I change them all into percentages, it's a lot easier for me to see which one is the biggest. So that's kind of one of the reasons we do this. Also, we oftentimes have to convert back and forth in order to be able to solve different types of problems efficiently. There's better ways to solve when things are in different forms. Okay? All right. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be converting a decimal to a percent. When you have a decimal, remember, 0.12 or 0.1200ths or 1200ths, you'd convert that to a percentage by moving the decimal 2 places to the right. So for example, if I were to have 36/100ths like this, and I needed to convert that to a percentage, all I do is take my little decimal point, move it twice to the right, once, twice, and then I add where it lands my percentage sign. So this would be 36%. Now, it doesn't matter if you had 110 or 322 thousandths, you would still move it twice, and it might end up like you have a decimal in the percent, and that's okay. Just wherever that happens to land after you move it twice is where your percentage drops. Now, let's say you had 1, and you needed to move it from 1. You could move the decimal place, and you would still end up with 10% because you would still move it 2 times. So, I'm sorry, I said 1, if you had 1/10. So you had this, you could still move it twice, and you would end up with 10%. If you had this, you could still move it twice, and you would get 116%. So no matter where you get it, you need to make sure you still move it twice, and then just put that percentage sign wherever it lands. Let's look at the next one. The next one is moving from a percent to a fraction. Well, we remember that a percent means per 100. It's out of 100. So if you have a percent and you need to move to a fraction, you're going to put the percent over, or put the number over 100, because percent means per 100. And then I'm going to add a little note here, then you simplify. So the example is, if you have 89%, I would just take that 89, put it over 100, and then looking at those numbers, can I reduce them anymore? Well, I can't, because 89 doesn't have a common factor with 100, so I'm stuck with it. But if I did, like if I had 50 over 100, I would simplify that, and it would end up being 5/10 and then 1/2. So simplify if you can. All right, so we've done decimal to percent, percent to fraction. Okay. Now let's do the next one, which is decimal to a fraction. So let's think back to place value. Remember, we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, and so forth. When we have two digits, we would have 45 hundredths or 50 hundredths or 16 hundredths. Well, think about that decimal as a fraction. If I were to write 16 hundredths as a fraction, I would have 16 over 100. So anytime you have a decimal and you need to move it to a fraction, you're going to read the decimal using place value and write it accordingly. So let's look at this one. Well, if I were to read that using place value, I know that the 45 is stopping in the hundredths, right? So I would have 45 hundredths. If I write that as a fraction, I end up with 45 over 100. But now I need to simplify. To simplify, I'm going to see what factor I can pull out of both. Do you guys know what factor I can pull out? Michael? 5. Good. So 45 divided by 5 is what, class? 9. What's 100 divided by 5? 20. And so there we go. We got to simplify, and we've now converted from a decimal to a fraction. All right, so now moving on to the next one. A fraction to a decimal. So now we're going to flip it, and we're going to go the opposite way. Now, when you have a fraction and you need to convert it into a decimal, you're going to take the top number, which we call that the numerator, right? You're going to take the numerator, the top number, and divide it by the bottom number, or the denominator. And the top number goes into the house, or the castle. So, an example of this would be if I had 3/4, and I wanted to convert that into a decimal, I would do the numerator divided by the denominator. 4 cannot go into 3, so I'm going to put a 0 here. I'm going to add my decimal place and put a 0 in to keep going into the decimal. 4 goes into 30 7 times. 7 times 4 is 28. 30 minus 28 is 2. Add another 0. Bring it down. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, and there we go. So I end up with 75 hundredths. Interestingly enough, if I put 75 hundredths as a fraction and I simplify it, I'm going to get back to 3/4. So you can kind of go in a circle. All right, the next one is a fraction to a percent. So using what we just did with finding how a decimal from a fraction, we now are going to move the decimal place when we're done, and we can now turn it into a percentage. So let's do a practice. First of all, let's write our definition. Turn the fraction into a decimal. Then move the decimal 2 places to the right. So let's try 1/2. I would do the numerator divided by the denominator. It can't go into 1, so I'm going to put my placeholders in. I'm getting squished here. Add a 0, and I end up with 5. So I had this as my answer. But now I need to change that 5/10 into a percentage. To do that, I take my decimal, I move it once, twice, add my percentage place, and then I have this little spot here. I'm going to add a 0, and I end up with 50%. So 1/2 is equivalent or the same as 50%. It's also the same as 5/10. You can write it in any of those 3 ways, and it's the same value. Finally, the last one, percent to a decimal. To make a percent a decimal, you're going to move the decimal 2 spaces to the left. The opposite of changing a decimal to a percent, you're going the opposite way. So for example, if I have 45%, I would start at where the percentage sign is, move it twice, and then put my decimal in, and I end up with 45/100. A couple other ways you could do this. You could make it into you could take the percent, make it into a fraction, 45/100. You could then know that 45/100 is 45/100ths, and you could write it that way as well. So really you can go any way you need to convert, you can do it, but just understand those are the many rules. All right, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to go to page 63. And we're going to do some practicing. The first one says change 36% to a decimal. We're going percent to decimal. Remembering to do that, we are going to move our percentage sign 2 places to the left. So we have 36%. I start here and I go 1, 2, and I end up with 0.36 or 36/100ths. All right, let's do the next one. Change 56/100ths to a fraction. So we're going to go from decimal to fraction. To do that, remember we say it 56/100ths, which looks like this. And then we simplify, and do we know of a factor that we can pull out of 56 and 100? What is a number that we can divide both by, Cody? 2. We can. If I do 56 divided by 2, I'm going to get 28. If I divide 100 by 2, I'm going to get 50. But I think there's another number I can do even more. Jeremiah? 12 does not come out of 56, but good guess. Raul? 4. Very good. 56 divided by 4, do you know what that is? Ainsley? 14. 56 divided by 4 is 14. What is 100 divided by 4? Anybody? 25. So there we go. All right, the next one. Change 76/100ths to a percent. So we're going to go decimal to percent. To do this, we are going to move our decimal place 2 spots to the right. All right? So we have 76/100ths. We go 1, 2, and we get 76%. The next one. Change 1/2 to a decimal. So we're going from fraction to decimal. Okay, so we're going to have to divide on this one. We put our numerator inside. We put our denominator outside. 2 cannot go into 1, so we're going to put our decimal places in. Add a 0. 2 goes into 10 5 times. 5 times 2 is 10. Subtract, and we get 0. So we end up with 0.5 or 5/10. Moving on. The next one. Change 1/4 to a percent. So we're going to go fraction to percent. Okay, start off by doing 1 inside the house, 4 on the outside because we got to change it first to a decimal. 4 does not go into 1, so we're going to add our decimal places and add our 0. 4 can go into 10 2 times. 2 times 4 is 8. Subtract it. Add another 0. 4 goes into 20 5 times. 5 times 4 is 20. Subtract, and we end up clear. So now we have to take 25 hundredths and make it into a percent. To do that, we move our decimal place 2 times to the right. Good. 1, 2, and we end up with 25%. And our last one, okay? Change 86% to a fraction. Okay, so let's remember now that 86% is 86 pieces of 100 whole. 86 out of 100. So now we are going to take that and we're going to simplify it. Well, what factors can we pull out of both 86 and 100? 86 divided by 6, and I don't think 86 can go into, or 6 can go into 100, and I don't know if it can go into 86. Try again. What other number? James? 2. What is 86 divided by 2? 43. Class, what is 100 divided by 2?
15.
43 is prime, so we're stuck. So there you go. Alright, so when you're doing this, remember, use the approach that best serves what you need to do, and go back and rewatch these notes if you need more help. Have a wonderful day.